going to talk to you now about structuring courses, sections and lectures in your online course. I'm making this lecture, because Paul, a student in one of my courses, has actually asked me about structuring sections and lectures. Are there best practices for sections and lecture structuring? Well, great question. It did get me thinking. So I've tried to put a few thoughts together here, and the first answer, I'm afraid, is there is no definitive answer. There is no absolute best practice, because it's all a question of subjective interpretation and trying to work out what's best for your students, which is always a bit of a moving feast. Remember, of course, that people learn in three different ways, and with online courses it's quite difficult to address all three, but it is possible. The first is auditory, so people like to listen to things and they learn. So I love listening to podcasts and learn a lot that way. Visual is seeing it on the screen. So if you have a diagram or a picture or an image or something like that, that helps people to absorb the information. And again, I like to think of things in pictures, and I often put something into a mind map or something, and I do it because the mind map gives me a visual image that I can sort of think through and work with. And then there's kinesthetic, which is essentially feeling and doing, which is more difficult with online courses, but you can set people things to do and assignments and that sort of thing, so they actually go and do it for themselves. To start with, every course needs a framework. Think about it as scaffolding that's going to hold your building up. And the framework, in essence, needs a beginning, a middle and an end. And I'm sure when you've been in college or at school and they taught you to write an essay, you've got to have an introduction to your essay, you've got to make the points in your essay, and then you've got to have a conclusion, because otherwise it's just a ramble of disorganized thought, and that doesn't help anybody to absorb any information. I like to say, when you're thinking about teaching anything, you tell people what you're going to teach them, you teach it to them, and then you tell them what you've taught them. The first thing prepares people for the information they're about to receive, so that when they receive it in the second phase, it's not a surprise to them. They can, okay, yes, I know I was going to be told this, and here we are. And then you run through it again quickly. You revise what's been taught, just to make sure they haven't missed anything. And if you were in a live teaching situation, and I've done plenty of live teaching, particularly when I was in the army teaching soldiers different skills, you'd have a demonstration, you get them to do it, and then you have a Q&A session, you take questions, you reinforce the lesson. Again, more difficult with an online course, but if you do go through quickly and revise the point that you've made at the end, then it helps them to understand what's being taught. Now, this applies at every level. You need to apply this framework, this structure and this approach at the course level, at the section level and at the lecture level. And I have to admit, for a lot of my sections, I haven't got intro and outro lectures. It does become, quite an additional piece of extra work, and I tend to want to get on and teach. So I try to introduce what's being taught in the section head and in the section description, and then get into the meat and potatoes in the lecture. So if you're looking then at a lecture, you need to have your introduction to your lecture. In this lecture, we're going to cover structuring courses, sections and lectures. We now go through the various key points, and at the end, I'm going to summarize it. So that's very straightforward. In your course introduction, let's look at this in a bit more detail, because there are some things you can specifically do to make it easier for students and make your course better as a result. First of all, in your introduction, your first video, which doesn't need to be more than a couple of minutes long, set out the key learning objectives of the course, so people understand exactly what they're going to get from the course. Then the next lecture, the first proper lecture, which, although I think average lecture length should be 3 to 5 minutes, this first one wants to be a bit meatier, about 8 to 10 minutes. And the reason for that is you really want to teach something amazing. You really want to get your students engaged with what is going on. And I might put this at the beginning of my masterclass course just to make this very point. But you teach them something really engaging, and after that one lecture, you want them to go away thinking, this guy really knows what he's talking about, and I'm really going to learn something amazing from this course. One of the things on Udemy is that they ask for a review after 10 minutes of the course, which can be quite early for some people. So if you haven't taught them something amazing by then, if you haven't engaged them completely, then they are going to say, well, actually, this is all a bit of a waffle. I'll give you another example. In my M&A course, I had quite an old section at the beginning, which was very elaborate, but actually had music in it and various distractions. And I got a pretty scathing review from one of my students. And I went back and had a look at it, and I thought, you know what, she's right. She has a point. So I deleted that section and I re-recorded actually 9 new lectures to put into that section, which I thought were much more to the point. And actually I made the first 3 of those preview enabled so that people could see them. And that's another point, is to make a number of lectures at the start of your course preview enabled. So if people are looking at your course and trying to decide whether to enroll in it, they can get that early learning lesson. They can get that feeling that they're going to get something amazing from the course, and that may well help them to make the decision to enroll in your course. Whatever you do in your introductory lecture, don't talk about yourself for more than 30 seconds. They are there to learn the key lessons of the course. They don't really want to hear you extolling your own virtues about your amazing college education. This is something which, again, in the past, there's been encouragement to talk a lot about who you are and why you're the right person for the course. But actually, I think just touch on who you are briefly and then quickly move on and start talking about the lessons of the course. At the end, I normally have just one summary lecture. I congratulate people for completing the course. I quickly run through the main sections of the course. I remind them that I'm here to help, and that's it. You can have a bonus lecture in Udemy where you can put links to other things and promote other courses and that sort of thing. I don't find that, frankly, they convert terribly well. I will be revising all my bonus lectures to make them simple and easy to encourage students to go on to the next course. But fundamentally, your summary lecture is the end of your course. Going back to the main structure of the course, every section has to cover a key topic, just like every course has to have a single learning objective. And then every lecture should cover one key point. So in this lecture, we're covering the structuring. That's the main thing about this lecture. We're talking about structuring. And then make sure that within the lecture and within the section and within the course, the structure flows. The points flow in a logical sequence so that people learn it in a logical sequence. And I like to give you an example of building a model from Airfix, from a plastic kit. Something which I loved doing as a child. Actually, I've just picked up another one, but that's another story. I'm going to make a Spitfire soon. They follow you through, they take you through the instructions numbered 1 to 100. And if you started trying to assemble the wings before you'd built the fuselage, you'd have nothing to attach the wings to. And it's the same with a course. You have to do it in a logical sequence that makes sense. With arts courses, this is slightly more difficult. With programming courses and technical courses, it's slightly more obvious what the section is. And that's why it does require a certain amount of thought. The way I tackle this is I use either a Word document with a bulleted list, or I use a mind map, and then I set out the list of points, and you can have different layers of the bullets and different layers of the mind map. And you have your course overall, you then have your sections, then you have your lectures, and then you have your lecture points. And if you set this out all in detail, the course writes itself. And of course, it's very easy to move things around, cut and paste, and get the order right. And at the end of the day, you end up with a set of bullets. I, as you can see, work from bullets. Some people like to work from scripts. But however you decide to do it, that basically writes your course. And I end up often with a set of bullets, which I can just paste into these keynote presentations, and I'm up and running and ready to go. Remember that if you are working with bullets or with a script, try as much as possible to maintain eye contact with the camera, which is what I'm doing at the moment. Occasionally you'll see my eyes dart away because I'm looking to pick up the next bullet, although by the time I put this together, I know pretty well what I want to say. So keeping eye contact with the camera is critically important. If you don't, it doesn't engage with the student, and it can be very distracting for them. See, I'm now checking the screen to see what's going on, see how it works. If you can give people opportunities to revise the topic or to ask questions, that's really helpful. Of course, I'm always available to take questions, which I enjoy doing, and responding in this way is a slightly more elaborate way of answering a question. But of course, you can set quizzes in Udemy, and you can set projects and assignments in Udemy and on other platforms, and they can be quite useful. Use them appropriately to your topic. Don't just flood them in for the sake of it. And of course, make sure, where appropriate, you can present material visually as well as audibly. I'll have an example of that coming up in a moment. Course length is tied to this. Well, frankly, courses can be as long as you like. The key point is the course should be long enough to address the topic and solve the original objective of the course learning objective. That's the main point. Lectures, ideally 3 to 5 minutes long, no longer than 10 minutes. This is deliberately a long lecture because I want to get a real meat and potatoes into this. Keep intros to lectures, music and other distractions to an absolute minimum. I have used them in the past and I've had nothing but bad comments about them. I've stopped doing them. Here's a visual example. What I wanted to tell you about this point is with your courses and in the analytics section of your dashboard, you can see the student engagement with the lectures. Now, this is an interesting example because I told you, remember, I re-recorded a section. This is the section I re-recorded. So you can see I've got engagement on the old sections, but because I've literally just published the new section, there's no engagement. But you can watch the engagement levels, and inevitably it tails off towards the end because more students start and many students don't finish. But if you see lectures which are not engaging and people are dropping off early and they're out of pattern, either re-record them, delete them, or move them. But you need to keep an eye on the analytics here to make sure that the lectures are engaging your students, and you can learn a lot from this. Using these analytic tools is really important. So there you are, structuring courses, sections and lectures. I've taken you through, now you see I'm revising what I've just told you. I've taken you through some key points about course structuring, about section structuring, about lecture structuring. I've given you some key tips about how to make these more effective, how to learn from analytics, how to set up your first course section. I hope you find this useful, and I hope you, by applying it to your courses, you're going to materially improve the experience for your students and help them to learn from you.